How far apart are US and Iranian officials in these talks for a deal on Iran's nuclear program now? It seems from oil that traders are getting optimistic. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, they're still very far apart. It's tough to say that any progress has been made over the course of the weekend. But one thing that is new is the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, in an interview with CBS News, did seem to suggest that the Iranian side are willing to engage in negotiations with the U.S. as soon as Thursday, this coming Thursday in Geneva. And indeed, we know that this is perhaps something that the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff have been pushing for as well. The real possibility of exploring all diplomatic options before a military attack is on the table. Now, a military attack is most definitely on the table, as we've been reporting the last couple of weeks, with that massive buildup in the region, the likes of which not seen since prior to the Iraq war in 2003. So it eclipses even that of the military buildup we saw prior to the Iran-Israel war last June. And so all this signals suggest that the U.S. is actually preparing itself for a military strike, and under what form that could take. Reports of the weekend, the New York Times suggesting that maybe one thing that the U.S. could do, and again, this is speculation at this point, is going for a limited military strike in order to bring Iran even closer to negotiating along the U.S.'s terms and offering more concessions, after which, if Iran don't concede, then they could be looking at something like a more protracted and long-term military operation. But some question marks there, and not least because it's unclear at this point what exactly the U.S.'s objectives are, whether it's inflicting more damage on military sites, on nuclear sites, or on actual full regime change, in which case, you're looking at something with unforeseen consequences in the region, which is why the decision has been such a difficult one for them to make. I would also just add, Lizzie, that around 2/3 of the American public are against the idea of a protracted military operation in Iran. So still a lot of things that the Trump administration need to consider ahead of making that decision of whether to strike or not strike.
And of those two scenarios that you set out, Joumanna, where does it leave the Strait of Hormuz, which of course is the focus for markets?
Yeah, I think the big focus on whether or not this action happens in the next week is going to be exactly how Iran retaliates. So the U.S. could go for that limited military action. They could choose to target weapons depots. They could target more of those nuclear sites, or go after regime personnel, which is what we saw happen in the Iran-Israel war last year, at least from the Israeli side. But then how Iran responds is going to be key here. And Iran know that they have a stronghold over this crucial choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, that could massively impact the flow of trade of seaborne oil. As we were speaking about last week, about 20 to 25% of daily oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. But beyond that, they could also retaliate on assets in Gulf nations. And we know that the U.S. have their military bases. Last year, there was that telegraphed attack on the Al Udeid base in Qatar. And for sure, Gulf nations do not want to see a repeat of that happening. Back in 2019, we also saw attacks on Saudi Aramco facilities in Araghchi, which is why since then you have seen these Gulf nations try to sort of mend relations, so what, with Iran, to ensure that they themselves will not be targets should things really kick off. And then the other option, of course, is that perhaps terror cells around the world, we're talking about, in Europe, potentially could be activated as well. So again, we need to be on high alert for the Iranian response to a potential U.S. attack.